Hello everyone, my name is Avishkar Nikale. As Masa said, that I work as a senior technical architect at LTI, and for now I have been for a while now I have been working with the DevOps movement, and I was one of the first initiators for DevOps enabled automation projects inside LTI as well. So right now it's 3 a.m. in India, and I hope the 2 cups of coffee which I have had till now, will make me strong enough to make sure that I will be able to give justice to the topic itself. So my topic is making DevOps sexy. That is putting the security in DevOps. So I'll just jump onto the next slide. So what is the world we are living in right now? So this is just a snapshot of the last 6 months of news, if you have read about it. So on 1st of April, I think we got to know that a lot of passwords on the Facebook were potentially were stored in plain text and could have been accessed by any of their employees. And it appears that it has been ongoing since 2012. Same with Amazon. Amazon was hit with a major data breach in Black Friday, and Google shut down the Google Plus network in 2018, that is last year, not because the site was not doing that well, that was one of the reasons, but also definitely after discovering a data breach. And we all know that the richest man in the world, Jeff Bezos, had his phone hacked. So looking at the current environment and looking at the kind of threats and vulnerabilities we are open to, I think it's very important to put security in the perspective of what we have in today's world. So what are the vulnerabilities and attacks which we are facing? So it's backdoor entries to the systems, it's denial of service attacks, it's direct attacks, and other things like phishing, social engineering, spoofing, tampering. And due to these vulnerabilities and attacks, I think most of our systems, be it internal or be it external, are susceptible for intrusion, for penetration as well. And it becomes more and more important with respect to the new digital era which we are in, and we have Internet of Things, we have access to so many devices. The data which we are, the amount of data which we are consuming is growing by exponential terms. So that is why I think the amount of vulnerabilities and attacks which we have, and the amount of vulnerabilities and attacks we are exposed to, is also going to grow exponentially. So what are the systems which are at risk due to these attacks and due to these vulnerabilities? Is there are obviously financial systems. These are the most desirable ones for the rogue elements. There are certain things like utilities and industrial equipments which are definitely under the attack from various hackers. So you might have heard about the incident in Ukraine where the entire power grid was shut down by hackers. We have aviation, we have consumer devices, we have large corporations who are susceptible to the attacks, and various sectors as well. So that is something which means that I think it's the length and breadth of most of the systems which we have at our hand, and which help us with our day-to-day lives, be it us as individuals, corporate entities, or even governments. So just giving you a brief glimpse of what has happened in the past 2 weeks. I think there is a Norwegian aluminum manufacturer called Norsk Hydro, where they were attacked by a Locker-Gaga ransomware, and they were infected with their entire system, when they had to resort to entire manual operations. So right now, none of their automations or none of their systems work online. So they have taken the entire things off the grid, and they are working manually to ensure that they can keep the company running. And it's a very, very major breach which happened recently. Obviously, again, WordPress, which is the biggest content management provider or content management site in the world, at almost 70% of the web still runs on WordPress. And so if you see, 90% of hacks are definitely targeted towards WordPress. And on 25th of March, I think 2 hacking groups actually spotted a vulnerability in their Easy WordPress SMTP plugin, and they are trying to target websites which are running unpatched versions of the said WordPress plugin. Okay, I think yesterday we had some good amount of talks on DevOps, and DevOps and quality definitely go together. So I'm not a big fan of variant versions of or various versions of DevOps which come up, DevSecOps or DevTestOps. But I think what essentially DevOps does is that brings us all together. So before DevOps, and when the agile movement started, I think agility was something which was very focused on the development part of or the software development part of the entire life cycle of a product or of a project. And it essentially brought business and the tech team or the IT team together. But looking at the entire value stream, I think that is where DevOps came in, and it was the next logical step for agile, saying that we definitely want to work towards for the entire value stream. So be it dev, be it test, be it sec, be it ops, be it database, be it network, be it business analyst, be it marketing. So I think that is what for me it summarizes that it brings all the groups together. And definitely security is one thing which has always been an afterthought, at least in my personal experience, that we look at security first from a very different angle than what it needs to be right now in the current world. So I have two reports with me. One is the 2018 Sonatype DevSecOps report, and where they have actually tried to see and check out with various surveys that at what maturity do teams implement automated security testing, and they found out that teams which are highly mature with respect to their basic DevOps practices are also more clean or more likely to integrate automated security. So that percentage, is something around 338%. The DevSecOps report for 2019 just came out, and again from a mature elite DevOps practices, now they have defined, Sonatype has defined that which are the companies which have elite DevOps practices, and out of that, again, same thing applies that the companies which have elite level of DevOps practices, they are 350% more likely to integrate automated security tests. Having said that, what is the things which we definitely need to do? So talking about the normal security cans, so from my perspective, I'll give you an example, is that when I started my career, I think a security tester was somebody, who used to come in the midnight, and used to, hack our systems or try and everything on our system. And maybe a week or two later, we used to get a PDF report. So, we used to develop the code and we tested everything out, and we are ready for production. And that is what point, somebody comes and tell us that, due to audit and due to compliance, we also have to send the code to our security team. And we don't know who those people are, and what do they do. So they scan the code, they send us a PDF test result, and then we haggle over, what is correct, what is incorrect, what is the interpretation, and, so we can talk about n number of things from length of bread, what is the probability of this issue happening, whether this is actually an issue or not. So we had the security incidents report where we used to go through it extensively and try to fix it, not just from a compliance or from a security point of view, but also to make sure that, we meet our deadlines. And then we used to fix the security defects, and again, the whole cycle used to start. Now, if you look at the way organizations are working, right now, mature organizations actually deploy from on daily basis, or at least to 10 to 100 times a day, which means that the normal way the security testing works will not work for the new age, at least not with respect to the cadence of deliveries which we want to put into production. So security in DevOps or DevSecOps says that the old way of security testing won't work. It's just too slow. There are just too many people involved with respect to doing everything, because it means that somebody has to get the access to the entire application. They need to know how your test environment is different than your production environment. So certain things which might fail in test environment might pass in the production environment, and vis-a-vis simply again with respect to that. And again, there is a lot of knowledge which is needed to be imparted to the security testers for them to know where to find vulnerabilities or where potential threat modeling can be done, which means that again, and because of the expertise of the functional knowledge and the technical knowledge of the application or the subject under test being with the team, whereas the expertise being with the security team, there was no empowerment of either of the team. So that is somewhere we lacked the focus. So now time matters. We are in the world where we are doing at least daily deployments or at least hundreds of deployments on a per day basis, where we cannot wait for a security scan to be completed even in 2 hours or 3 hours. So it means that we need security testing on a continuous basis. So we're looking for three things in making sure that we put the sexy back in DevOps. That's DevSecOps. So we need automation, high level of automation. We need education for the teams, for the department, for our auditors, for our compliance people as well, because they need to know that after automating anything, they still need to trust the reports which are coming out of these entire automated processes. And obviously empowerment of teams is essential, so that the team knows what they are up with, and they can do their own threat modeling, and they can do their own vulnerability scans, and they don't have to rely on an external team or an external dependency to get through what 80% of the defects which or the 80% of vulnerabilities which they can solve on their own. That obviously there are certain expertise which are needed, and you will still need some kind of external validation if you're in a vendor kind of a scenario, or if you're in a or if you're in a non-compete or a conflict of interest kind of a scenario. So where you will need to definitely make sure that certain things are done by certain teams, and then certain things are validated by certain other things with respect to segregation of duties. So two things to ponder: how will you perform all your testing quickly? And the other part is, again, who is responsible for security in DevOps? So again, the answer to this was also in the previous slide. So how do you perform all your testing quickly is that you make sure that you automate it what you can, and you run everything parallelly what you can. So it means that sometimes you might have to spawn off a grid of servers and do your tests parallelly, then so be it. And again, who is responsible for security in DevOps? I think from a security perspective, I think everybody is responsible for security. So be it the business analyst, be it the developer, or be it the tester. So they all have to have a security mindset. Okay, so I would like to quote Gene Kim, who is the author of the Phoenix Project, one of my favorite books on DevOps. So he says that the only thing more dangerous than a developer is a developer conspiring with security. And I think I couldn't agree more with that. So we come to the part where we have the thinking security, or the security mindset, which we talk about. So I'm not sure if all of you have gone through this manifesto. So it's called the Rugged Manifesto, and Rugged basically describes a way of developing software, where we have the ability to create a survivable, a defendable, and a secure, resilient software. So I'll just go through briefly with respect to the points which the Rugged Manifesto covers. The first thing is, I am rugged, and more importantly, my code is rugged. I recognize that the software has become the foundation of modern world, and I recognize the awesome responsibility which comes with that. So I have to make sure that whatever code I write, I have to anticipate that it will be treated and used in the ways it was not designed, and it will be again in use before I move out of the project, or if I move on to something else. And again, most of the attacks which are going to happen will be happening by talented and persistent adversaries who can threaten our national, economic, and physical well-being. And we recognize these things, and we make sure that we make security as an integral part of our development process, and not as an afterthought, not as in something which we just need to get done with because we need a compliance approval and we need to go to production quickly. It has to be an integral part of our entire ethos, and the way we look at making sure we deliver correct code. So for example, if I ask anybody, when was the last time they thought about opening a port and thought about the security vulnerabilities which they will be putting their organization or their servers up to. Yeah, when we talk about taking a file transfer from one place to the other, what are the kind of hacks and the attacks which can happen when we open up something like a very trivial thing like a feedback from the customer. Can this particular feedback be used to attack us from a denial of service attack by flooding us with a number of requests? So there are so many things which from a threat modeling perspective which we don't think of, because we think that we are behind a firewall and everything is hunky-dory for us. But so from a security perspective, you have to trust no one and verify everyone. That is something which needs to be imbibed in each and every step of the process when we do our agile software development, or we are implementing the whole shebang of DevOps. So it is important for us to shift left security. As I said that earlier, vulnerability scanning were only happening. It was like of a production tool gate, and it was something which was done just to make sure that you are able to put the software in production. what has happened with DevSecOps is that we have been asked to move our security concerns left. So the teams are more and more empowered with respect to the knowledge which they need to have, and they need to move security testing as closer to the development environment, even back to the local environment if possible. So DevOps says that the more your environments resemble each other the way they are in production, the more automation you can do and the more reliable your testing, your security testing and your functional testing can also be. So shift left security is definitely something which DevSecOps recommend, and it is highly needed because definitely we cannot wait for a production deployment to be planned to make sure that our software is working right. It has to be working correctly from the day one. Okay, so let's talk about how do we get started with respect to DevSecOps. So again, one of the main things is definitely, as I talked about, is that the knowledge and the thinking security mindset which we need to have. But from a toolset perspective, I'm pretty much sure that most of the companies still do have a kind of a tool set which they mandate or they need. Either it is a tool set or it is done by a third party or an external vendor. So whatever it is, you definitely need to take a look at your current tool sets. You should be ready to introduce new and throw out the old ones, and you need to make sure that you make the tool selection a team effort. The way we emphasize that the estimation in an agile team needs to be done by the team as a whole, it's exactly the same reason why we would like to make the tool selection also a team effort, because the team which is working on the software or working on the application or working on the product knows the best the way to do it. Okay. So they are best to tell us what languages do we need to support, what are the future tech or the past technologies you have, do we have any vulnerable products or vulnerable frameworks or vulnerable components, which we need to take care of, what tests do we definitely need to cover. Certain things might be exposed to the entire world, certain things might not be exposed, and they can do some level of threat modeling internally. And obviously how lightweight are the tools, so that a heavier tool will give you a heavier lead time, a longer lead time. A faster tool or a distributed a tool which can do distributed analysis for you will give you faster lead times. So again, talking about the tool set, definitely, there are certain tools which are heavily used by most of the security professionals, but they are also cumbersome to use. So they require a lot of manual intervention, and certain tools also have a lot of automation with them. So you need to take a judge with respect to how the tool, how the scans can be automated for your own organization or for your own subject under test. How long will the scan takes is again an important criteria for you to decide how quickly can you build your pipeline, and what is the delivery cadence or the deployment cadence which you can have. Again, open source is okay, commercial tools are okay. You need to consider different tools for different needs. There is no such thing as a silver bullet for security testing. You will have to cherry pick from various threats. You'll have to model your vulnerabilities and then come up with a plan to execute the same. So talking about the types of tools, so there is 3 types of tools. So I'll talk about the SAST first. So that's the static application security testing, which actually analyzes the source code and tends to have a very high positive false positive rate, wherein it might or might not be possible in a real-time environment, but definitely it'll try to bring up certain vulnerabilities which are there in your code. It can be it can have uh, a good amount of impact, but it will also depend on the amount of source code which you have. So for example, if you have a small application, it can be quickly scanned, but if you have a large application with respect to large dependencies and everything, then static code analysis will definitely give you certain pointers with respect to certain components which you want to focus on, and certain components where you can relax. For example, it might be the certain components might not be accessible at least for now from the external entities, but how you can plan your entire activities around them. So that is where static application security testing will come into the picture. So there are commercial tools as well as open source tools. So my favorite is FindSecBugs. Obviously there is Fortify, AppScan, and Checkmarks, which are pretty famous as well. Then is the dynamic application security testing. So they run dynamic scans or pen test of your apps, and they try to hack into the app. So basically it's a live version of your application which is running somewhere, and then the tools try to hack into your application or penetrate into your application. Obviously, due to the nature of the way these applications work, the scan will definitely take some amount of longer time than usually a static code analysis would do. There are tools like WebInspect, Burp, AppSpider, and the Z-Attacks proxy from the OApps itself is another good tool of dynamic application testing, where your live environment or live application is actually put under threat, and you can do various things to find out what kind of vulnerabilities your application is susceptible to. Then is the interactive application security testing. So sec tests happen while the app in use, and it works using instrumentation. So the advantages of these kind of tools is that they have very low false positive rate, and have immediate feedback. But they're also pretty expensive in terms of and in terms of configuration, in terms of setup as well. So there are certain examples of this, like Contrast and Seeker. Okay. So what are the open source tools that you can explore to get started with DevSecOps? You can pick up any ethical hacking security course from any of the MOOC out there, and definitely try your hands on Kali Linux, which is the base for which most of the ethical hackers work on. There's Gauntlet, using Gauntlet Docker. So what Gauntlet Docker can actually help you is it can help you containerize your entire security testing, and it is actually a combination of a lot of other tools like Nmap, SQL Map, which we are also talking about here in the slide. So various tool set to explore, definitely. And again, as I said, that the way DevOps is not about tooling, it's also about culture. The same way DevSecOps is not about tooling, it's about the culture first and the tools later. So you need to have a thinking security mindset and then come to the tools part of it in collaboration with your teams. So what are the careers which are waiting for us? So from an October blog from udacity.com, it's the US Department of Labor has did some study, and the growth rate of cybersecurity or security related job growth rates is around 30%, around 28%, and Cybersecurity Ventures predicts that we'll need 3.5 million cybersecurity experts by 2021, which means that there is a lot on our plate, and definitely will not have so many people going around very quickly for us to be reliant on the security testing which needs to be done for our applications, which means that we need to empower our current teams more and more, so that the needs of the security test they can definitely be utilized for their expertise which are needed from a specific perspective, and not for every small possible thing which could go wrong in your application. So that's why the empowerment of team is much more important, and shift left of security is also much more important. So various careers awaiting are right from security analyst to chief information security officer to security consultants, specialists, security intelligence specialists. And the modern warfare, which is an imminent threat to most of the systems right now, is we have seen about a lot of botnet attacks happening for IoT enabled devices or devices which are connected to the internet. There are instances of drone hacking which are already covered in the news in the recent times, as well as with respect to satellites which can be hacked or can be disabled by the hackers as well. And obviously we are talking also about the IoT hacks. So the last slide is more not to be an alarmist, but it again tells us why security is becoming much more and more important, and why we definitely need to address it head on, because the world is changing pretty fast, and the amount of devices and the amount of things which we are opening up at the pace at which we are opening up, and the pace at which digitalization and digitization is happening, it's definitely going to be one of the cornerstones of our success. For it can be an organization, it can be an individual, as I said, it can be a government, or it can be a nation. It's definitely security will be a cornerstone, and I think DevSecOps will definitely be playing a huge part in the coming future. So that's it from me. If there are any questions, I can take them now.
What is the time to market impact of adding security to DevOps?
Okay, so yeah, so I think that's a very valid question with respect to what is the impact. So it is actually has a huge impact on the time to market for any product. So depending on the way your organization is structured, and dependent on the compliance and the norms which you definitely will be following in your organization, it can have an impact of, as I said, that from 1 to 2 weeks with respect to what needs to be done. But as I said, that the more when you start off with DevSecOps, it's going to take time. So it'll still be 1 to 2 weeks lead time for your. You can add the 1 to 2 weeks lead time to your production dates. But after you get your automation done and your vulnerability scans automated, I think and you create a baseline for your compliance and for your security department to validate those reports, I think it can definitely come down to 1 or 2 days. So for certain applications where you need you need to deploy on a daily basis or 10 times a day or 100 times a day, you can take waivers for which parts of application or which parts of code do not need to go through the entire scan, and then you can scan only the specific components. So I would say that your development cadence should work in correspondence with your security testing cadence, and the more you automate, the more you can keep the lead time low.
I wanted to build a little bit more on that because time to market is really very important to the organization. And as we go through the process of shifting left, there's obviously an impact on the time to market. And we see that whenever people like, whether it's Microsoft or whether it is Facebook, they blow it because they needed to go ahead and get it out public, and they left it whole. Yeah. So how do you handle that?
So I think that is a very important topic with respect to. So I've been reading a book called Thinking Security. So it's basically it talks about a concept called as you need to do a viability survey as well with respect to what you need to get done in this particular scenario, which means that if the threat or if the vulnerability or if anything which you're releasing in production is going to cost you more for doing the security test, and the cost of delay is going to be higher than the impact which it will have on your market or on your financial profile. If there is a kind of attack or there is something which will happen to the product, then you weigh it out, and that is when you decide whether you want to do a security test for a particular release or not, or do you want to do a full-blown release test or not, or do you just do certain sets of tests, certain sets of basic sanity to go ahead into production. Having said that, there are still zero-day vulnerabilities which come out, and for which organizations do a zero-day attack kind of and invite ethical hackers in. So having said that, it is a fine line between how much it will cost you, the cost of delay versus the cost of threat is something which you need to balance it out.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. And that being said, as we really try and move toward shift left, what do you recommend tool-wise, and I know there's not a plug for the tools, to help us achieve a quicker, cleaner, safer product out the door with considerations, Dr. Mark?
Right. So with respect to most of the scans which we plan, I think the investment from containerization is a very heavy part of it. So you can still choose a lot of tool sets which are which will help you the test, but parallelization is something which is very important, and parallelization using containerization is very important. So for example, you want to do a vulnerability scan of your application, and maybe it's split into 10 modules. So you will not be doing, so everything need not be done sequentially. So that is where you'll have to invest in making sure that your application is also designed in a way that it can be tested parallelly, as well as your security test framework which you are using and the automation which you're trying to use can also be parallelized, so that let's say your security test would take 10 hours for 10 modules, but if you are running parallel in 10 instances, then you should be done in 1 hour. So that's the takeaway from making sure that it is fast enough, so that the basic premise is that you want it to be fast enough so that you can do it frequently.
What is the dynamic security tool you appreciate the most?
So I appreciate Gauntlet Docker the most because it is actually gives me a part to plug in everything into my Docker container. So be it my functional test using Selenium and Cucumber, be it my security test using Gauntlet and Map SQL, I can do the entire thing together in the same container. And as I said, it helps me making sure that everything can be done parallelly for 10 different reasons. So Gauntlet Docker is my tool to go.
Cool. So what stage in your DevOps journey would you advise to introducing automated security testing?
Okay, so again, it depends on application to application basis. If it's a customer facing application, I would suggest that you do involve a security tester or a security expert right from your inception of your design, low level design, high level design, because threat modeling is something which needs to be done as a before thought and not as an afterthought. So, you can, if, for example, you can be implementing a very small thing like a feedback functionality, and a hacker can use it to just make sure that he or she can send you gigabytes of payload and make your servers go out. So there are a lot of things which you need to take care of before you actually deploy to production. So for products, for applications which are heavily customer facing and heavily susceptible to the open world, I would suggest that you do your threat modeling right at the sprint 0 or at least at sprint 1, and you make sure that security is a conscious effort. For things which are internal, for legacy applications, I would say that you need to do security tests like bare minimum patching. You need to do with respect to same things like cross-site scripting, cross-request forgery. These are the kind, or the top 10 OWASP vulnerabilities which we have. You need to focus on that and make sure that your application is compliant to that. But that, again, for legacy and internal applications, it can still follow the older cycle of you be doing it in test or something like that. But anything which is digital, anything which is customer facing, needs to happen along with the entire sprint 0 or with sprint 1. So when you're writing your acceptance criteria, your security threat modeling should also give you your security acceptance criteria.
What do you think about our privacy versus government sniffing in?
So I think that's an entirely new debate altogether. So from that perspective, I think, yeah, so, there are certain things with respect to sniffing, if you talk about. So
Yeah,
there are
right.
certain things which are allowed by certain constitutions, certain things which are allowed by certain amendments, but still there are ways to circumvent that. So nothing is foolproof. So as I said that most of the security measures which we have can never be foolproof, and the most of the sniffing also cannot be foolproof. So
Yeah.
there are various aspects to it, and I think I cannot summarize it in an answer as such, because it's a topic on its own. But from privacy perspective, I definitely think that that is something which is very important, and that again cannot be solved just by technology alone. It needs a conscious effort for us as a humanity and everything else as well. So I think I know it's a very vague answer, but that's something which is at the top of my
I
mind.
think you did fine.
Okay.
How does the DevSecOps tackle internal social engineering?
Okay, internal social engineering. I would say that that is something which I would not say is a very encouraging thing in an organization to have. So if you have internal social engineering happening, there are other cultural problems which you need to fix before you actually need to fix the security part of it first. Having said that, for internal social engineering, what usually happens is that we have, as I said, that what Jin Kim said is that there is nothing more dangerous than a developer colluding with a security professional. So usually, what we have is we have resources or credentials being shared, because there is a camaraderie between the people who work in the ops side or people who have the credentials, and there is certain things which you want to do quickly. And I think majority of the reasons why this happens is because people are fed up with the processes and with respect to the compliance and with respect to the lead time to get things done. So when you look at the entire value stream of a process where security intervenes and where you see that social engineering is happening, it can be like, somebody asking just for a password, or somebody, getting sure that, they have access to bot accounts, or they have access to server accounts. It means that, they just want to get things faster. It's not always that, they have a malicious thought in mind. But if we address the lead time and the ease of doing work for most of the processes, I think social engineering can come down to bare minimum, and then maybe it is something which is a cultural part of the organization which needs to take care of it. That why is it still happening? But from my perspective, we have seen that the more you automate, the more you make sure that the flow of work doesn't get hampered, the lesser of these things like credential sharing, it can be any other things with respect to social engineering happen less and less, because if my workflow is not getting hampered, I really need not look for a workaround. and it's looking for this workaround, is what creates those loopholes. So making sure that my team is able to work fast is more than enough for 80 to 90% of social engineering to go down.
Is there an equivalent to TDD and BDD in security?
I think so. That's a wonderful question. So most of the tools which you see is that they definitely they can be plugged into almost everything. So I can definitely write. So I'll give you an example. Gauntlet actually works on the premise of given when then. So if you want to write a script for, let's say, scanning the entire ports of a server, let's say from port number 1 to port number 8000, you can definitely write a given when then script and still get your results out as a BDD test, and it can be plug and played very easily. So from the perspective, I think BDD is something which we define the behavior, and the behavior of the system under security test also would not differentiate. So I can still plug in my behavior test with a security module and can still patch it up and can still do a BDD kind of test for it.
A regulation such as GDPR really help in privacy and security. Does it really guarantee greater privacy?
So again, I'm not a GDPR expert, but having gone through it for one of our Nordic clients, I can tell you that it definitely grants you more control over your data, what most of the organizations keep with them. So it gives you a more amount of transparency. It gives you more amount of authority to, so it's basically what the entire GDPR compliance, when it came into the picture, there was also one specific thing which came up very highly, was the right to be forgotten. So for example, if you have certain things which again does not hold on you for any of the civil or criminal liability, you have the authority to ensure that the entire relevant data is deleted, irrespective of whether you put it in it or not. So there are various websites when you log in, and when you just, for example, if you log into LinkedIn and if you look at the terms and conditions, there are so many conditions which you would earlier you would have would have been in non-compliance with the GDPR requirement in EU. So I think EU has done a great thing with respect to GDPR. But as I said, that there are certain things which are again gray areas, so where you need more clarity. So, but I think for 80% of our requirements, GDPR should work well for the privacy. It's only in the cases or in the edge cases where we need certain things, it'll definitely hamper. There is also one more caveat which I'd like to point out, is that the world which we are living in right now, is where we want to do a lot of artificial intelligence. We want a lot of machine learning. I want everything to be served on a platter, but that will not happen if the applications or the code or the algorithms which are working on have enough data about me to do that very quickly for me. So it's a double-edged sword. So having a lot of compliance and reducing the amount of data will mean more privacy, but it'll also mean that you will lose out on most of the experiences which we definitely want to have, or maybe the newer generation or the generation X, not even the millennials, the generation Z. I don't know how many of those are coming up right now. They definitely are not worried more about the privacy. They are worried more about the ease of life, which they definitely need. So it's a balancing act.